12 years of school, and not one lesson on how to escape being broke. They taught you how to pass tests, how to memorize, how to follow instructions, but they never taught you how money actually works. They didn't teach you how wealth compounds, how businesses scale, or why some people seem to move ahead, no matter where they start. And that's not an accident, because once you understand the rules of money, you stop playing the game the way everyone else does. This audiobook is the class you were never given, the financial education that changes how you think, decide, and build. No theory, no fluff, just the truth. So if you're ready to see what was missing all along, stay with me. Chapter 1. The education you never received. You spent years in school, sitting in classrooms, listening, memorizing, repeating information, preparing for tests. You were told this was the path. Study hard, get good grades, follow the system, and eventually you would succeed. That was the promise. And for a long time, you believed it because it made sense. It felt structured, predictable, safe. But at some point, reality didn't match the promise. You did what you were told. You followed the path. You put in the effort. And yet, financially, nothing changed the way you expected. Because there was something missing, something important, something no one explained. School taught you how to think in a certain way, how to follow instructions, how to complete tasks, how to meet expectations. But it never taught you how to build, how to create, how to think independently about money. And that is where the gap begins. Because making money and building wealth are not the same thing. Earning is active. It requires your time, your effort, your presence. But wealth is structured. It is built. It grows over time. It compounds. And that difference changes everything. But you were never taught that. You were taught how to earn, not how to build. You were prepared to work inside systems, not create your own. And that is why so many people feel stuck. They are doing what they were trained to do, but expecting a result they were never trained to achieve. Think about it. You learn mathematics, but not how money multiplies in real life. You learned history, but not how wealth is built across generations. You learned how to write essays, but not how to structure income, how to create assets, how to design systems that produce value. And because of that, you entered the real world with incomplete knowledge. You knew how to work, but not how to leverage. You knew how to follow, but not how to build. You knew how to earn, but not how to grow what you earn. And that creates a cycle. You work, you get paid, you spend, you repeat. And over time, you realize something. You are active, but not progressing. Busy, but not building. Moving, but not advancing. Because the system you were trained for is not the system that creates wealth. And this is not accidental, because systems are designed for specific outcomes. The education system prepares people to function within structure, to become reliable, consistent, capable of performing tasks. And there is value in that. But it does not teach ownership. It does not teach leverage. It does not teach how to create something that operates independently of you. And that is where the separation begins, between those who stay in the system and those who learn to build outside of it. Another thing school never taught you is how money actually behaves. Money is not just something you earn. It is something that moves, flows, multiplies, or disappears based on how it is used. But without understanding that, money becomes temporary, something that comes in and goes out, without leaving anything behind, because you were never taught to direct it, to structure it, to use it as a tool for growth. Instead, you were taught to manage it, budget it, control it, but not expand it. And that is why many people remain stuck. They become good at managing money, but not building it. They learn how to survive financially, but not how to grow financially. And survival has limits. Another missing piece is the concept of assets, not just in theory, but in practice. An asset is something that produces, something that generates value over time, something that works, even when you don't. But most people were never taught to think in those terms. So they focus on income, on earning more, instead of building assets. And that creates dependency. Because now, everything depends on their next paycheck, their next opportunity, their next effort. And that is not stability. That is continuous pressure. Another gap is understanding risk. In school, mistakes are punished. Wrong answers are marked. Failure is discouraged. So you learn to avoid risk, to stay within what is safe, what is known, what is predictable. But in the real world, growth requires risk, calculated risk, strategic risk, the willingness to act without full certainty. And if you've been trained to avoid mistakes, you will hesitate, delay, overthink, and miss opportunities, not because you lack ability, but because you were conditioned to fear being wrong. And that limits you. Another thing you were never taught is how to think long-term. School operates in short cycles. Tests, exams, grades, immediate feedback, immediate results. But wealth doesn't work like that. It is built over time, through consistency, through patience, through compounding. And if you expect immediate results, you will abandon the process too early. You will assume it's not working and move on before anything is time to grow. So you stay in cycles, starting, stopping, restarting, but never staying long enough to build something real. This is the hidden cost of incomplete education. Not what you learned, but what you didn't. Because what you don't know still affects your decisions, still shapes your actions, still defines your results. And until you become aware of it, you continue operating with the same limitations. So understand this clearly. You're not behind because you failed. You are behind because you were never taught what matters most. How to build, how to leverage, how to create systems, how to think in terms of growth instead of effort alone. And once you see that, something changes. You stop blaming yourself and start taking responsibility, because now you understand. If you want different results, you need different knowledge, different thinking, different actions, not more effort in the same direction, but a shift in direction entirely. From earning to building, from working to creating, from following systems to designing them. And that is where your real education begins. Not in a classroom, not from a curriculum, but from awareness, from questioning what you've been taught, and choosing to learn what actually moves you forward. Because once you start learning that, everything begins to change. Not instantly, not easily, but permanently. Because now, you're no longer limited by what you were taught. You are expanding into what you choose to learn. And that is where real growth starts. Chapter 2. Why following the system keeps you average. From the very beginning, you were given a path. Clear, structured, defined. Go to school, get good grades, graduate, find a job, work hard, climb the ladder, and eventually, you will be stable, secure, successful. That is the system. And for most people, it feels like the only option, because it is all they have ever known. It is reinforced by parents, by teachers, by society, by everyone around them. So they follow it, step by step, without questioning where it leads. Because questioning feels risky, uncertain, uncomfortable. But here is the truth most people never stop to consider. The system is not designed to make you wealthy. It is designed to make you functional, reliable, predictable, capable of operating within structure. And there is nothing wrong with that if your goal is stability. But if your goal is wealth, it is not enough, because wealth requires something different. It requires ownership, leverage, creation, and the system does not prioritize those things. It prioritizes compliance, following instructions, meeting expectations, staying within boundaries. And over time, that shapes how you think, how you act, how you make decisions. You become someone who waits for direction, someone who looks for approval, someone who follows established paths, instead of creating new ones. And that is where limitation begins, because average systems produce average results. If you follow the same path as everyone else, you will end up where most people end up, and most people are not financially free. They are managing, surviving, maintaining, but not building, not expanding. not creating something that grows beyond them. Another hidden effect of following the system is that it removes responsibility. Not completely, but subtly. You are told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and as long as you follow instructions, you are considered successful. But in the real world, there are no clear instructions, no guaranteed paths, no defined outcomes. You must decide. You must take responsibility. You must create direction. And if you have spent years being guided, that shift can feel overwhelming. So instead of stepping into it, many people retreat. They look for another system to follow, another structure to depend on, another path that feels safe. But safety has a cost, because safe paths are crowded, predictable, limited. They offer stability, but not expansion. And that is why so many people stay in them, even when they feel unfulfilled, even when they know there is more. Because stepping outside the system feels uncertain, and uncertainty feels dangerous. Another problem with the system is that it rewards short-term performance, not long-term thinking. You are evaluated based on immediate results, tests, deadlines, output, and that conditions you to focus on what is right in front of you. What needs to be done now? What produces immediate feedback? But wealth requires a different mindset. Long-term thinking, delayed gratification, building something that may not show results immediately, but grows over time. And if you are conditioned for short-term rewards, you will struggle with long-term processes. You will want quick results, fast outcomes, immediate validation. And when you don't see it, you will assume it's not working and move on before anything meaningful has time to develop. Another limitation is how the system views time. You are taught to trade time for results. Study for hours, work for hours, put in time to get output. But time-based thinking has limits. Because time is fixed, you cannot scale it. You cannot multiply it. And if your mindset is built around time, you will always think in terms of effort. How much time will this take? How many hours do I need to put in? But wealth is not built on time alone. It is built on leverage, on systems that produce more than the time invested, on structures that continue working, even when you are not. And that way of thinking is not taught in the system. Another hidden effect is fear of deviation, doing something different, choosing another path, building outside the norm. It feels risky because it goes against everything you've been taught, everything you've seen, everything that feels familiar. So even when you have ideas, you hesitate, you doubt, you question whether it's the right move, because there is no clear approval, no guaranteed outcome, and that uncertainty keeps you in place, following the path you know, even if it leads somewhere you don't want to go. But here is something important to understand. Following the system is not failure. It is a starting point. It gives you structure, discipline, basic skills, but it is not the destination. If you want more, if you want to build, if you want to create something beyond average, because average is not accidental. It is the result of following the average path. So if you want different results, you must make different decisions. Not reckless ones, not random ones, but intentional ones. Stepping outside the default path, learning things that are not taught, thinking in ways that are not encouraged, building instead of just performing, creating instead of just following. And that shift is uncomfortable because it requires responsibility, ownership, decision-making without guarantees. But it also creates opportunity because now you're not limited by the path. You are defining it. You're no longer just participating in a system. You're building your own. And that changes everything because now your results are not determined by structure alone. They are determined by your thinking, your actions, your willingness to move differently, to take calculated risks, to build something that does not rely on the same limitations. So understand this clearly. If you continue to follow the system exactly as it is, you will get the results it is designed to produce. And those results are average, predictable, limited. But if you are willing to step beyond it, to think differently, to act differently, to build instead of just follow, you open the door to something else. something less certain, but far more powerful, because now you're no longer confined by the system. You're using it as a foundation while building something of your own. And that is where real growth begins. Chapter 3. The hidden rules of money no one explained. Money is everywhere. You use it every day. You think about it. You work for it. You depend on it. And yet, most people don't actually understand how it works. Not deeply. Not in a way that allows them to grow it. Because what most people know about money is surface level. Earn it. Spend it. Save it. Repeat. And while that may help you survive, it will not help you build wealth. Because beneath the surface, money follows rules. Unspoken rules. Rules that are not taught in school. Rules that are rarely explained. But rules that quietly determine who builds wealth and who stays stuck. The first rule is this. Money flows toward value. Not effort. Not time. Not intention. Value. You can work extremely hard and still earn very little. Or you can create something valuable and earn exponentially more. Because money does not reward how hard you try. It rewards what you produce, what you solve, what you create that others need. And this is where many people get stuck. They focus on effort, on working more, on doing more, instead of increasing the value of what they do. Because effort feels productive. It feels like progress. But without value, it has limits. So the real question is not, how hard am I working? But, what value am I creating? And how scalable is that value? Because scalable value is what changes everything. The second rule is this. Money multiplies through systems, not isolated actions. If you perform a task once, you get paid once. If you build a system that performs that task repeatedly, you get paid repeatedly. That is the difference between linear income and exponential growth. And most people stay in linear systems. They do work. They get paid. They stop. They start again, over and over. But systems remove that limitation. They allow output to continue without constant input. And that is where multiplication begins. The third rule is leverage. Leverage is what allows you to do more without doing more yourself. It comes in different forms. Time leverage, using other people's time. System leverage, using processes and automation. Knowledge leverage, using ideas that can be applied repeatedly. And when you combine leverage with value, growth accelerates because now you're no longer limited by your own capacity. You are expanding beyond it. But most people never reach this point because they're focused on individual effort, not collective output. The fourth rule is ownership. If you don't own what produces income, you don't control it. You depend on it. Ownership gives you control. Control over direction, over growth, over decisions. But without ownership, you're always tied to something external. A job, a client, a platform, something that can change without your input. And when it does, your income changes too. Ownership reduces that risk because now you're not just participating, you are directing. The fifth rule is retention. It's not just about how much you earn. It's about how much you keep and what you do with what you keep. Because money that is not managed disappears. It flows out as quickly as it flows in. And without retention, there is nothing to build with, nothing to invest, nothing to grow. So even high income can lead to no wealth if there is no structure behind it. The sixth rule is compounding. Money grows faster over time when it is allowed to stay and multiply, not constantly removed, not constantly spent, but reinvested, reused, directed into systems that generate more. Compounding is slow at first, almost invisible, but over time, it becomes powerful because growth builds on growth, and eventually, it accelerates beyond what effort alone could achieve. But compounding requires patience, consistency, discipline, and most people interrupt it. They take out too much, too early, too often, and as a result, they never experience its full effect. The seventh rule is perspective. How you see money determines how you use it. If you see it as something to spend, you will consume it. If you see it as something to grow, you will invest it. If you see it as scarce, you will fear it. If you see it as a tool, you will direct it. And that difference shapes behavior, which shapes results, which reinforces belief, creating a cycle that either builds wealth or maintains limitation. Another hidden truth is that money follows structure, not emotion, not desire. You can want more money. You can need more money. You can even deserve more money. But none of that matters, because money does not respond to feelings. It responds to systems, to value creation, to structure, to consistency. And without that, nothing changes. So wishing for more is not enough. You must build in a way that attracts it, that produces it, that sustains it. And that requires understanding these rules, not just intellectually, but practically, applying them, testing them, refining them, until they become part of how you operate. Because once you understand how money actually works, you stop chasing it blindly. You stop relying on luck, on hope, on external circumstances, and you start building intentionally. You start creating systems, increasing value, using leverage, retaining and multiplying what you earn. And that changes your entire approach, from reactive to strategic, from dependent to controlled, from limited to expandable. So understand this clearly. You are not struggling with money because it is complicated. You are struggling because the rules were never explained. But now, you see them. And once you see them, you cannot ignore them, because they reveal something important. Money is not random. It is predictable. It follows patterns. It responds to structure. And if you learn to work with those patterns, instead of against them, everything begins to shift. Not instantly, but steadily. Because now, you are no longer guessing. You are operating with understanding. And that is the difference between hoping for wealth and building it. Chapter 4. Why most people stay stuck even after learning the truth. At some point, you begin to understand. You start seeing things differently. You realize that money follows rules, that systems matter, that leverage changes everything, that the path you were given is not the only path available. And for a moment, it feels like everything is about to change. Because now you know, now you see, now you understand what most people don't. But then, something strange happens. Nothing changes. You still wake up the same, still follow similar routines, still hesitate, still delay, still operate within the same patterns. And that creates frustration. Because now you can't say, I don't know. You know. And yet, you're not moving. This is one of the most frustrating phases. Because awareness without action creates tension. You see the gap between where you are and where you could be, and that gap feels uncomfortable. But instead of closing it, most people stay in it, not because they want to, but because something deeper is holding them in place. And that something is not lack of information. It is resistance, internal resistance, because knowing the truth is not the same as living it. Understanding something is not the same as acting on it. And that is where most people get stuck. The first reason is habit. Your current life is built on patterns, repeated behaviors, automatic decisions, things you do without thinking. And those patterns don't disappear just because you learn something new. They continue, quietly, consistently, pulling you back into the same routines, the same actions, the same results. Because habits are powerful. They operate below awareness. They don't ask for permission. They execute automatically. So even if your mind has changed, your behavior may not. And until behavior changes, nothing else will. Another reason people stay stuck is comfort. Not comfort in the sense of happiness, but comfort in familiarity. Even if your situation is not ideal, it is known, predictable. You understand it. And stepping into something new means stepping into uncertainty, new challenges, new risks, new expectations, and that creates discomfort. So even when you know you should change, part of you resists because it prefers the known over the unknown, even if the unknown is better. This is why people stay in situations they've outgrown, not because they don't see the problem, but because change feels heavier than staying the same. Another hidden force is identity. You may understand wealth. You may understand systems. You may understand what needs to be done. But if you still see yourself as someone who struggles, who hesitates, who overthinks, who doesn't follow through, your actions will reflect that, because identity shapes behavior more than logic ever will. You don't act based on what you know. You act based on who you believe you are. So if your identity hasn't changed, your results won't either, no matter how much you learn. Another powerful reason is fear of responsibility. When you don't know something, you can excuse your results. You can say, I didn't have the information. I didn't understand. But once you know, that excuse disappears. Now the responsibility is yours. If you don't act, it's not because you couldn't. It's because you chose not to. And that can feel heavy, because it removes the safety of ignorance. It forces you to confront reality, to take ownership, to make decisions without hiding behind lack of knowledge. And for many people, that level of responsibility is uncomfortable. So they avoid it. They stay in learning mode, consuming information, watching, listening, understanding more, but not doing more, because learning feels productive. It feels like progress, but without action, it changes nothing. Another reason is overthinking. Now that you understand more, you see more possibilities, more strategies, more options, more paths, and instead of simplifying your direction, it complicates it. You analyze, you compare, you question every step, trying to find the perfect move, the perfect plan, the perfect timing. But perfection doesn't exist, and waiting for it delays everything, because action requires imperfection. It requires moving forward without complete certainty. And if you're always thinking, you're not moving. And without movement, there is no progress. Another barrier is fear of failure. At a deeper level, before, failure might have meant trying something and it not working. Now, failure feels different. Now you know what to do. So if you try and fail, it feels more personal, more real, more confronting, because now you can't say, I didn't know better. So instead of risking that, many people stay safe. They avoid taking full action. They stay in partial effort, enough to feel like they're trying, but not enough to truly test themselves. And that keeps them stuck, because real progress requires full engagement, not half steps, not hesitation, but commitment. Another overlooked reason is environment. The people around you, the conversations you have, the expectations that surround you. If you're in an environment where growth is not normal, where building is not discussed, where risk is discouraged, it becomes harder to act, because your environment reinforces your current behavior. It normalizes staying the same, and stepping outside that feels isolating, uncomfortable, different. So many people adapt to their environment instead of changing it, even if it limits them. Then there is the issue of delayed results. You may start acting, start applying what you've learned, but results don't appear immediately, and that creates doubt. You question whether it's working, whether you're doing the right thing, whether you should continue. And without immediate feedback, motivation drops, consistency weakens, and many people stop right before things begin to shift because they expect results too quickly. They underestimate the time it takes for real change to happen. So they quit early, reset, and start again, repeating the same cycle, but never staying long enough to see results. So understand this clearly. Learning is not the breakthrough. Action is, but not just any action. Consistent, focused, imperfect action, taken repeatedly over time, despite discomfort, despite uncertainty, despite lack of immediate results. Because that is what breaks the cycle. That is what transforms awareness into progress, and progress into results. So if you feel stuck, even after understanding more, It is not because you lack knowledge. It is because something is blocking action. Habits, comfort, identity, fear, environment, overthinking. And until you address those, nothing changes. Chapter 5. The discipline most people avoid. There is a type of discipline that most people talk about, but very few actually practice. It's not the loud kind, not the kind that looks impressive from the outside, not waking up at extreme hours just to prove a point, not working endlessly just to feel productive. This kind of discipline is quieter, less visible, but far more powerful. It is the discipline of doing what matters, even when it feels insignificant, even when no one is watching, even when there is no immediate reward. Because this is where real progress is built, not in moments of intensity, but in moments of consistency. Most people think discipline is about pushing hard, about forcing effort, about extreme action. But that version doesn't last. It burns out. It fades. It collapses under pressure because it depends on emotion, on motivation, on temporary energy. And those things are unstable. Real discipline is different, is stable, predictable, repeatable. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It depends on what you've decided. And once that decision is made, you follow through again and again and again, even when it's boring, especially when it's boring, because boredom is where most people quit. Not difficulty, not failure, but repetition, doing the same thing, without excitement, without visible progress, without recognition. And that is where discipline separates people, those who continue and those who stop. Another reason this discipline is rare is because it requires delayed gratification. You put in effort today without seeing results today. You work without immediate reward. You build without immediate validation. And that feels uncomfortable because the human mind prefers instant feedback, instant satisfaction, instant results. So when those don't appear, it assumes something is wrong. It wants to stop, to switch, to find something that feels better. But discipline overrides that. It says, continue anyway, because it understands something important. Just because you don't see results doesn't mean nothing is happening. Progress is often invisible at the beginning. It builds beneath the surface, quietly, gradually, until eventually it becomes visible, but only if you stay. Another form of discipline most people avoid is the discipline of focus, choosing one path, one direction, and committing to it without constantly switching, without chasing every new opportunity, without being distracted by what others are doing. Because staying focused means letting go of other options, and that feels uncomfortable. It feels like you might be missing something, like there might be a better path, a faster way, an easier option. But constant switching destroys progress. It resets momentum. It keeps you at the beginning. So discipline requires commitment, staying with something long enough for it to work. Another difficult form of discipline is the discipline of standards. Not what you do occasionally, but what you accept consistently, the level you operate at, the quality you maintain, the effort you give, even when no one is watching, because your standards define your results. If your standards are low, your results will reflect that. If your standards are inconsistent, your results will fluctuate. But if your standards are high and consistently applied, your results improve naturally because you're no longer negotiating with yourself. You're operating from a fixed level, and that removes decision fatigue. It removes hesitation. It creates clarity. You know what is expected, and you meet it every time. Another form of discipline people avoid is the discipline of saying no. No to distractions. No to things that don't align. No to short-term comfort. That delays long-term progress. Because every yes costs you something. Time, energy, focus. And if you say yes to everything, you dilute your effort. You spread yourself too thin. You lose direction. So discipline is not just about what you do. It is about what you refuse to do, what you eliminate, what you protect your time from. And that is what creates space for growth. Another overlooked aspect of discipline is emotional control, not reacting instantly, not acting based on temporary feelings, not letting frustration or doubt or impatience control your decisions. Because emotions fluctuate, they change quickly, and if your actions follow them, your progress becomes unstable. So discipline requires stability, the ability to act consistently, regardless of how you feel. And that creates control, because now you are not reacting to circumstances. You are directing your actions, and that keeps you moving forward. Another powerful form of discipline is finishing, not just starting, not just trying, but completing what you begin, pushing through the middle, through the phase where excitement fades, where progress slows, where it feels repetitive, because that is where most people stop. They start strong, with energy, with motivation, but they don't finish. And without finishing, there are no results, only attempts, only unfinished efforts, only wasted potential. But those who finish, who push through to completion, they're the ones who see outcomes, because they stay long enough for their work to matter. So understand this clearly. Discipline is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters, consistently, without relying on emotion, without needing constant motivation, without stopping when it becomes uncomfortable. Because comfort is the enemy of progress, and discipline is what allows you to move forward, even when comfort is gone. So if you want to grow, if you want to build, if you want to change your situation, you must develop this discipline, the quiet kind, the consistent kind, the kind that doesn't look impressive, but produces results over time. Because in the end, success is not built on intensity. It is built on repetition, on showing up, on following through, on doing what needs to be done, even when it feels small, even when it feels slow, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Because something is happening. You are building. You are improving. You are moving forward, one step at a time. And over time, those steps add up. They create momentum. They create progress. They create results. But only if you stay disciplined. Only if you continue. Only if you refuse to stop. And that is the discipline most people avoid. But it is also the discipline that changes everything. Chapter 6. The skill that changes everything. Thinking independently. Most people don't realize it, but the way they think is not entirely their own. It has been shaped, influenced, directed by everything around them. School, society, family, environment, experiences, and over time, these influences create patterns, ways of thinking that feel natural, obvious, normal. But many of those patterns are not designed for growth. They are designed for stability, for fitting in, for following what already exists. And that is why independent thinking is so rare, because it requires you to step outside of what feels familiar, to question what you've been told, to look at things differently, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it goes against what everyone else believes. Independent thinking is not about being different for the sake of it. It is about seeing clearly, without automatic assumptions, without blind acceptance, without relying on what everyone says. Because what everyone says is often what keeps everyone stuck. Think about how most people make decisions. They follow patterns. What is the safe choice? What do people usually do? What is expected? And those questions lead to predictable actions. Actions that produce predictable results. Average results. Because average thinking creates average outcomes. Independent thinking breaks that pattern. It asks different questions. What actually works? What makes sense based on reality? What creates the best outcome long term? And those questions lead to different decisions. Decisions that move you away from the default path and towards something more intentional. But thinking independently is not easy because it requires responsibility. When you follow what others say, you can avoid blame. You can say, I just did what I was told. I followed the path. I did what everyone else does. But when you think independently, you own your decisions fully. There's no one to blame, no one to hide behind. And that level of ownership can feel uncomfortable because now the outcome is yours, whether it succeeds or fails. Another reason independent thinking is difficult is because it challenges beliefs. Beliefs you've held for years. Beliefs that feel true, even if they are not. For example, you need a stable job to be secure. Business is too risky. Making money is hard. Successful people are different. These beliefs are common. They are repeated often, so they feel real. But independent thinking questions them. It asks, is this always true? Who benefits from this belief? What evidence supports this? And often, you realize something surprising. Many of these beliefs are not facts. They are assumptions, conditioned ideas, repeated thoughts that were never tested. And once you see that, you begin to break free from them. Another important part of independent thinking is separating information from truth. We live in a world full of information, advice, opinions, strategies. Everyone's sharing what works, what doesn't, what you should do, what you shouldn't. And while some of it is useful, much of it is noise, conflicting, overwhelming, distracting. If you try to follow everything, you lose clarity. You hesitate. You second-guess. So independent thinking requires filtering, not accepting everything, not rejecting everything, but evaluating, testing, deciding what aligns with your direction, and ignoring what doesn't. Because clarity is not found in more information. It is found in better judgment. Another key element is thinking long-term. Most people think short-term, immediate results, quick outcomes, fast rewards. But independent thinkers zoom out. They look at the bigger picture. They ask, where does this lead in 5 years? What are the long-term consequences? What builds over time? And that changes decisions. Because many things that feel good short-term create problems long-term. And many things that feel difficult short-term create growth long-term. So independent thinking allows you to see beyond the moment, beyond immediate comfort, and make decisions that serve your future. Another powerful aspect of independent thinking is the ability to stay grounded in your direction, even when others don't understand it, even when people doubt it, question it, disagree with it, because when you move differently, you stand out, and not everyone will support that. Some will question you, some will criticize, some will try to pull you back into what is familiar. Not because they want to harm you, but because they don't see what you see. They are operating from their own beliefs, their own limitations, their own perspective. And if you rely on external validation, you will hesitate. You will adjust your path to fit expectations. You will hold back. But independent thinking gives you stability. It allows you to trust your direction, even when it is not understood, even when it is not popular, even when it feels uncertain. Because you're not moving based on approval. You're moving based on understanding. Another important truth is this. Independent thinking improves with action, not just reflection. You can think deeply, analyze, question, but until you act, your thinking remains theoretical. It is action that tests your ideas, that shows you what works, what doesn't, what needs adjustment, and that feedback sharpens your thinking. It makes it more accurate, more practical, more effective. So independent thinking is not just about questioning. It is about applying, testing, refining, continuously. Another reason this skill changes everything is because it removes dependency. You're no longer waiting for instructions, for permission, for guidance. You become self-directed. You create your own path. You make your own decisions. And that gives you control. Because now, your progress is not limited by what others tell you to do. It is driven by your own understanding, your own actions, your own direction. So understand this clearly. Independent thinking is not optional if you want to build something beyond average. Because average thinking follows. It accepts. It repeats. But independent thinking questions, creates, builds. And that is what separates those who stay in the system from those who build beyond it. So start paying attention to your thoughts, to your beliefs, to the assumptions you make. Ask yourself, is this true? Or is this something I've been taught to believe? And once you begin doing that, you will start to see things differently. Chapter 7. The transition from consumer to creator. Most people spend their entire lives consuming. Consuming information, consuming content, consuming products, consuming ideas created by others. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, you are surrounded by things designed for you to take in. Scroll, watch, read, listen, absorb, and at first, it feels productive. It feels like you're learning, improving, staying informed. But there's a hidden problem. Consumption without creation creates stagnation, because while you're taking in more, you're not producing anything, not building, not applying, not turning knowledge into something tangible. And that creates an imbalance. You know more, but you do less. You understand more, but you build less. And over time, that gap grows between what you know and what you actually do. This is where most people get stuck. They believe they are progressing because they are constantly learning. But learning alone does not create results. Only application does. Only creation does. Because value is not generated by what you consume. It is generated by what you produce, what you create, what you put out into the world. And that is where the shift must happen. From consumer to creator. But this transition is not easy. Because consumption is passive. It requires no risk, no exposure, no judgment. You can sit back, take in information, and feel safe. But creation is different. It is active. It requires effort. It requires decision-making. It requires putting something out that can be judged, criticized, ignored, and that creates resistance. Because now, you're no longer hidden. You are visible, and visibility feels uncomfortable, especially at the beginning, because your work is not perfect. Your ideas are not fully refined. Your execution is not yet strong, and that makes many people hesitate. They think, I need to learn more first. I need to be better before I start. I need to be ready. So they keep consuming more videos, more books, more advice, more strategies, but they never create because more learning becomes an excuse, a way to delay action, a way to avoid exposure, and that keeps them stuck. Another reason this shift is difficult is because consumption is addictive. It provides instant satisfaction, new information, new ideas, new stimulation. It feels good. It feels engaging. But creation is slower. It requires focus, effort, repetition, and the reward is delayed. So the brain naturally prefers consumption because it is easier, more comfortable, more immediately rewarding. But that comfort comes at a cost, because while you are consuming, others are creating, others are building, others are producing value. And over time, they move ahead, not because they know more, but because they act more, they apply more, they create more. And that is what generates results. Another important difference is this. Consumers react. Creators decide. Consumers follow trends. Creators build direction. Consumers wait for opportunities. Creators create them. And that difference changes everything. Because when you operate as a consumer, you are dependent on what exists, on what others create, on what is available. But when you become a creator, you become independent. You generate value. You build assets. You create opportunities. And that shifts your position completely. Another challenge in becoming a creator is consistency. It is easy to consume occasionally, but creation requires repetition, showing up regularly, producing consistently, even when you don't feel like it, even when results are slow, even when no one is paying attention. And that is where most people stop, because they expect immediate feedback, immediate recognition, immediate results. But creation doesn't work like that. At the beginning, it feels invisible, like no one is watching, like nothing is happening. And that can feel discouraging. So people quit. They go back to consuming because it feels easier. But those who continue, Those who keep creating eventually reach a different phase where their work improves, their output increases, their understanding deepens, and slowly, results begin to appear. Because creation compounds, just like anything else, each piece builds on the last. Each attempt improves the next. And over time, what was once difficult becomes natural. Another important shift is this. Stop trying to create perfectly. Start creating consistently. Perfection delays action. Consistency builds progress. Because your early work will not be perfect. And it doesn't need to be. It just needs to exist. It needs to be real. It needs to be done. Because improvement comes from doing, not from waiting, not from thinking, not from planning endlessly, but from execution, repeated over time. Another key part of becoming a creator is ownership. When you create something, you own it. You control it. You decide how it evolves, how it grows, how it is used. And that creates leverage, because now your work can continue producing value, even when you're not actively working. Whether it's content, a product, a system, a business, creation builds assets, and assets create freedom because they reduce dependency on constant effort. And that is the real goal, not just working more, but building something that works for you. So understand this clearly. If you stay a consumer, you stay dependent, you stay reactive, you stay limited. But if you become a creator, you become proactive, you become valuable. You become capable of building something that grows. And that is the shift that changes everything. So start small. You don't need to build something massive. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to begin. Create something, anything. Apply what you know. Turn ideas into action. And repeat. Again, and again, and again. Because every act of creation moves you forward. Every piece of output builds momentum. Every step brings you closer to something real. And over time, you will notice something important. You're no longer just consuming the world. You're contributing to it. You're shaping it. You're building within it. And that is where growth accelerates. Because now, you're no longer waiting for opportunities. You're creating them. And that is the transition from consumer to creator. The moment you make that shift, everything begins to change. Chapter 8. Why most people never build anything that lasts. Most people don't fail because they lack ideas. They fail because they never build anything long enough for it to matter. They start. They get excited. They put in effort. They see a little progress. And then something happens. They slow down. They lose interest. They get distracted. They start questioning everything. And eventually, they stop. Not always completely, but enough to break momentum. And once momentum is broken, everything becomes harder. Starting again feels heavier. Progress feels slower. And over time, they begin to associate building with frustration, with inconsistency, with unfinished effort. And that becomes their pattern. Start, stop, restart, repeat, but never continue long enough to create something real, something stable, something that lasts. Because building something that lasts requires a different mindset, a different level of commitment, a different relationship with time. The first reason most people never build anything lasting is because they chase excitement. They want things to feel new, fresh, interesting, stimulating. And at the beginning, everything feels that way. New ideas are exciting. New projects are engaging. New directions feel full of possibility. But that feeling doesn't last. Excitement fades, always. And when it does, you're left with the work, the repetition, the consistency, the slow progress. And if you depend on excitement, you will leave every time it disappears. You will move on, search for something new, something that feels better. And in doing so, you abandon what could have worked if you had stayed. Another reason is impatience. Most people want results quickly. They want proof that what they're doing is working. They want validation, growth, visible progress. But real building takes time, longer than most people expect. longer than most people are willing to commit. Because in the beginning, progress is slow, sometimes invisible. You put in effort, and nothing seems to change, and that creates doubt. You start asking, is this worth it? Am I doing the right thing? Should I try something else? And without strong conviction, you stop, not because it wouldn't have worked, but because you didn't stay long enough to find out. Another major reason is lack of structure. Many people rely on motivation, on how they feel, on whether they are in the mood to work. But that creates inconsistency. Some days you show up, some days you don't. Some weeks you push, some weeks you disappear. And that inconsistency breaks progress, because building something that lasts requires continuity, repeated action, over time, not occasional effort, but structured effort, planned, consistent, non-negotiable. And without structure, nothing holds. Everything depends on how you feel. And feelings change. Another hidden reason is fear of committing to one path, because committing means choosing. And choosing means letting go of other options, other ideas, other possibilities. And that feels uncomfortable, because you might wonder, what if there's something better? What if I'm choosing wrong? So instead of committing, you stay flexible. You keep options open. You avoid going all in. But without commitment, there is no depth. Without depth, there is no mastery. And without mastery, nothing lasts. Because lasting results come from depth, from staying with something long enough to understand it, to refine it, to improve it, to make it work. Another reason people never build anything lasting is because they underestimate repetition. They think progress comes from big actions, big moves, big breakthroughs. But in reality, it comes from doing the same things over and over, improving slightly each time, refining slowly, adjusting consistently. And that repetition feels boring, predictable, unexciting, so people avoid it. They look for something more dynamic, more engaging, more stimulating. But in doing so, they avoid the very process that creates results. Because repetition builds skill. Skill builds efficiency. Efficiency builds momentum. And momentum creates growth. But only if you stay. Another critical factor is emotional reaction. When things go wrong, when results don't appear, when progress slows, many people react emotionally. They get frustrated, discouraged, doubtful, and those emotions influence their decisions. They slow down, they pull back, they stop pushing forward. But building something lasting requires emotional stability, the ability to continue, even when things don't feel right, even when progress is unclear, even when results are delayed. Because if your actions change with your emotions, your progress will always be unstable. Another overlooked reason is lack of clear vision. If you don't know what you are building, it is hard to stay committed, hard to stay focused, hard to push through difficulty, because there is no strong reason to continue, no clear direction, no defined outcome. So when things get hard, there is nothing holding you in place, and you leave. But when you have clarity, when you know what you are working toward, it becomes easier to stay, because now your actions are connected to something meaningful, something long-term, something worth the effort. Another important truth is this: building something that lasts requires you to outlast your own doubt. There will be moments when you question everything, when progress feels slow, when results feel far away, when you wonder if it's worth continuing. And in those moments, most people stop. But those who build something real, they continue anyway, not because they feel confident, but because they understand something deeper. Doubt is part of the process, not a signal to quit, but a phase to move through. So they keep going. They stay consistent. They maintain direction. And over time, that persistence pays off, because while others stop, they continue building. While others reset, they keep progressing. And eventually, they reach a point where everything starts to connect, where their work becomes stronger, more refined, more effective, and results begin to appear. Not suddenly, but steadily. And That is when it becomes clear. It was never about talent, or luck, or perfect timing. It was about staying. Staying when it was boring. Staying when it was slow. Staying when it was uncertain. Because most people don't fail. They just don't stay long enough. So understand this clearly. If you want to build something that lasts, you must commit beyond excitement. Chapter 9. The reality of building wealth no one talks about. There is a version of wealth that most people imagine. Fast, exciting, dramatic, a sudden breakthrough, a big opportunity, a moment where everything changes. And from that point on, life becomes easier. But that version is not how it actually works, because the real process of building wealth is far less exciting, far less visible, and far more demanding than most people expect. It is slow, at the beginning, uncertain, often uncomfortable, and at times, it feels like nothing is happening at all. This is the reality no one talks about, because it doesn't sell. It doesn't inspire immediate excitement. It doesn't create quick motivation, but it is the truth, and understanding it changes how you approach everything. The first reality is this. There is no clear moment when it starts working. People expect a turning point, a moment where effort suddenly pays off, where progress becomes obvious, where everything feels different. But most of the time, there is no single moment like that. Instead, there are small shifts, gradual improvements, subtle changes that build over time. And because they are small, they're easy to ignore, easy to underestimate. So many people assume nothing is happening, and they stop right before those small changes begin to compound. Another reality is that progress feels slow until it isn't. At the beginning, effort seems disconnected from results. You work, you build, you try to improve, but the outcome doesn't reflect your effort, and that creates frustration because it feels like your actions are not working. But what you don't see is that progress is building beneath the surface. Skills are improving, understanding is deepening, systems are forming, and all of that takes time to show. Then at some point, it starts to accelerate, not because something suddenly changed, but because everything you've been building has reached a level where it begins to connect. But only those who stay get to experience that shift. Another truth is that income does not equal wealth. You can earn more and still feel stuck, still feel pressure, still feel like nothing is changing. Because if your structure doesn't change, your situation doesn't change. More income without better decisions leads to the same patterns at a higher level. More spending, more dependency, more pressure to maintain. So wealth is not just about earning more. It is about building differently, thinking differently, using money as a tool, not just as something to consume. Another reality is that growth requires sacrifice, not necessarily extreme sacrifice, but intentional trade-offs. Time, comfort, distractions, short-term pleasure, things that feel good now, but delay long-term progress. And this is where most people struggle, because they want growth without giving anything up. They want progress while maintaining the same habits, the same routines, the same comfort. But growth requires change, and change requires letting go of what is no longer aligned. Another important truth is that uncertainty never fully disappears. Many people think, once I reach a certain level, I'll feel secure. I'll feel confident. I'll feel certain about what I'm doing. But that is not how it works. Each level brings new challenges, new decisions, new unknowns. And that means uncertainty continues. It changes form, but it remains. So waiting to feel completely certain before taking action will keep you stuck, because that moment never comes. Instead, you learn to act despite uncertainty, to move forward without complete clarity, to make decisions without guarantees. And that is what creates progress. Another reality is that comparison is dangerous. You see others succeeding, growing, achieving results, and it feels like they are ahead, moving faster, doing better, and that can create pressure, doubt, frustration, because you compare your process to their outcome, without seeing what it took to get there, without seeing the time, the effort, the failures, the repetition. So comparison distorts perception. It makes your progress feel smaller than it is. It makes your journey feel slower than it actually is. And if you focus on it, it can discourage you, slow you down, or even stop you completely. So building wealth requires focus on your path, your progress, your direction, not someone else's. Another truth is that mistakes are part of the process, not a sign of failure, but a sign of movement. You will make wrong decisions, take actions that don't work, try things that fail, and that is not a problem unless you stop because of it. Because mistakes provide feedback. They show you what to adjust, what to improve, what to change. And without them, there is no refinement, no growth, no progress. So avoiding mistakes is not the goal. Learning from them is. Another reality is that consistency is more important than intensity. Short bursts of effort do not create long-term results. Consistency does. Showing up repeatedly, maintaining effort over time, continuing even when motivation fades. Because intensity is temporary, but consistency builds. It accumulates. It compounds. And that is what creates real outcomes. Another truth is that the process can feel lonely. Because not everyone will understand what you're doing. Not everyone will support it. Not everyone will see the vision. And that can create isolation, doubt, questioning. But this is part of stepping outside the norm, part of building something different. Because if everyone understood it, everyone would be doing it. So you must be comfortable moving forward, even without full support, even without constant validation. Because belief must come from within, not just from others. And finally, the most important reality is this. Building wealth is not a single event. It is a process, a continuous process of learning, of building, of refining, of improving. There is no finish line where everything becomes easy, where effort disappears, where growth stops, because growth is ongoing. It evolves, it expands, it continues. And once you accept that, everything becomes clearer. You stop looking for shortcuts, for quick wins, for immediate breakthroughs, and you start focusing on the process, on what you can control, on what you can build, day by day, step by step. And that changes your entire approach, from chasing outcomes to building systems, from expecting fast results to committing long-term, from reacting to creating. So understand this clearly. The reality of building wealth is not what most people expect. It is slower, harder, more uncertain, but also more rewarding. Because what you build becomes real, stable, sustainable. Chapter 10. The final shift from knowledge to identity. At this point in your journey, something important has already happened. You're no longer hearing new ideas for the first time. You're no longer confused about what needs to change. You are no longer unaware. You see the patterns. You understand the system. You recognize the behaviors that keep people stuck. You can even predict outcomes based on thinking alone. And that creates a powerful moment, but also a dangerous one. Because awareness alone is not transformation. Knowing is not becoming. Understanding is not changing. And this is where most people stop. Not because they lack knowledge, but because they mistake knowledge for progress. They feel like they are evolving because they're learning more, thinking more, analyzing more. But their identity remains unchanged. And identity is the real foundation of everything. Not information. Not motivation, not strategy. Identity, because you do not act based on what you know. You act based on who you believe you are. If you see yourself as inconsistent, you will find inconsistency. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, you will unconsciously create struggle. If you see yourself as someone who starts but doesn't finish, you will keep stopping early. Not because you are incapable, but because your identity pulls your behavior back into alignment. So the real battle is not external. It is internal. It is the shift from information to identity, from I know what to do, to "this is who I am." Because when identity changes, behavior becomes automatic. You no longer force discipline. You're disciplined. You no longer try to be consistent. You are consistent. You no longer attempt to think differently. You naturally think differently. And that removes friction. The resistance disappears. The hesitation weakens. And action becomes natural. But this shift does not happen through thought alone. It happens through evidence, through repetition, through proof collected over time. Every action you take is not just a task. It is a vote for the person you are becoming. When you choose focus instead of distraction, you vote for discipline. When you follow through instead of quitting, you vote for reliability. When you continue despite discomfort, you vote for strength. And these votes accumulate, slowly, quietly, until one day they outweigh your old identity. And something changes, not suddenly, but undeniably. You begin to behave differently without forcing it. You begin to choose differently without struggle. You begin to move differently without hesitation. Because your identity has shifted. This is why small actions matter more than people realize. Not because they are impressive, but because they are directional. They are signals. They are evidence of who you are becoming. And identity always follows evidence. Not intention, not hope, not desire. Evidence. This is also why inconsistency is so destructive. Because every time you break your own standards, you're not just making a mistake. You're reinforcing an identity of hesitation, an identity of delay, an identity of inconsistency. And over time, that becomes familiar, comfortable, automatic. So the question is never, what do I want to achieve? The real question is, what identity am I reinforcing with my actions? Because every decision is shaping you, even the smallest ones, especially the smallest ones. And once you understand that, you stop separating actions from identity. You see them as the same thing. Action is identity in motion. So if you want to change your results, you do not start with outcomes. You start with behavior. And behavior starts with identity reinforcement. This is the final shift most people never fully make. They stay focused on goals, on results, on external change. But real transformation happens internally first, when the way you see yourself changes. Because once that changes, everything else follows. Not instantly, but inevitably. Your habits begin to align. Your decisions become clearer. Your discipline strengthens. Your direction becomes stable. And slowly, your life starts to reflect a different identity. One built through repetition, through consistency, through action. And at some point, you realize something important. You're no longer trying to become something. You're simply living it. Not because you forced it, but because you built it. One decision at a time, one action at a time, one moment at a time. And that is the final truth. You do not rise to your goals. You fall to your identity. So if you want to change your life, do not just chase better results. Become the person who naturally produces them. And then protect that identity. Feed it, strengthen it, reinforce it through every choice you make. Because over time, that is what defines everything. Not what you know, not what you want, but who you repeatedly choose to be. And once that is locked in, everything else begins to align around it. Because the moment identity shifts, the future stops being something you chase and starts becoming something you naturally build into reality.